Hello and welcome to the Balticon panel on warning signs for new and independent authors. My name is Joshua Bilmes. I'm the president of Jabberwocky Literary Agency, and I've been representing authors in the science fiction and fantasy field for 35 years, including #1 best-selling authors like Brandon Sanderson and Charlaine Harris, New York Times bestsellers, multiple Compton Crook Award winners, and over my shoulder, you'll see books by Nick Martell, whom I started working with at Balticon in 2017. So I'm especially proud of Nick and Kingdom of Liars. And I'll have the rest of the panelists introduce themselves. My first panel, I skipped somebody in the gallery view. So if I skip you, feel free to speak up. And I'll start with Anna.
Hi, my name is Aire Kashina. I am a fantasy author, so I write epic fantasy with elements of romance and a lot of sword fighting. I have books traditionally published, and I also have books that I self-published through a small press that I co-ran. So I think this is why I'm on this panel. And I just wanted to add that I really admire Joshua's work. I queried him a couple of times. I haven't been honored by being gaining representation, but I really admire your work. Thank you. So yeah.
Thank you. Angela?
Absolutely, thank you. Happy to be here. My name is Angela Yuriko Smith. I publish Space and Time magazine, which many of you are probably familiar with from Gordon Linsner. It's been around for a while. And we took it over in 2019. I publish independently since 2011. I started with my first book, End of May, way back then. Don't read it, please. It's a first book. But in 2018, I won the Bram Stoker finalist for my independently published book, which was Bittersweets. And I think I was, and I can't verify this, but I was the only independent publisher on that list, I know. And I might have been, there's not a lot of us out there. So I'm very proud of being independent and in helping others kind of reach that professionalism that we need to have to succeed. So very happy to be here.
And DH?
I'm DH Aire. I've just come out with my 21st book. I've had my first 2 books to be published were by 2 different small presses. And I since went indie. I'm a member of SIFWA.
Okay. Now, my first question, Anna, is that a background, or do you have like a library that you're doing this from? Because that's pretty amazing in the bookshelves you've got there.
Yeah, thank you. No, that's a background, but this is an environment I feel comfortable in. So I chose the background for a reason. And I think, yeah, we still have Alex. We didn't call
Alex. Right. Yeah, I didn't get a chance to introduce myself yet.
Oh, yeah. Sorry.
No problem. You warned us this would happen.
I mean, everybody knows Alex, right?
So hi, I'm Alex Shvartsman. I am an author, anthologist, and translator from Russian. I also am one of the administrators of the Open Call Facebook group, which has over 10,000 members, and it's a group where submissions calls, where people can submit usually short stories, but sometimes novels as well, are posted, and so we have to banhammer and moderate a lot of calls that are not, strictly speaking, legitimate. So I'll probably get to use some examples from that on this panel.
Well, so why don't we start right there then, Alex? Because my first question was kind of going to be, what's something specific that you would warn people about?
Well, oh man, there's so many different things. I'm going to start with something that's the most common for us, and that is calls where the publisher, or I use the term loosely, exists solely to collect money from the people who are hoping to get published. And so there are a lot of different ways in which they do this. Some of these ways include charging submission fees. Some ways include, pretending to want to publish somebody's short story or novel, and charging them all sorts of various fees for services involved in publishing this, which is not an industry standard at all. And some simply expect the authors to carry the bill in some way. Well, they'll say, hey, we're going to put together this anthology, but everybody has to kick in $150 toward marketing expenses, and then we'll be able to put the book forward and you'll be a published author. So those are really, really common, and there is never a scenario where you should be doing those things, at least in genre. Literary publishing is a little different, and where there are actually legitimate markets or semi-legitimate markets charging submission fees sometimes. But there is no legitimate speculative market where you should pay a submission fee to have your work read by an acquisitions editor or a slush reader.
Okay. Anna,
Mhm.
anything specific that you would start off by warning people about?
Well, I fully agree with Alex. So I think when I started publishing, the formula was the money has to go to the author, not from the author. So if anybody charges you fees for anything at all, it's not legitimate, basically. And yeah, I don't know enough about literary markets, but that's kind of what I went by. So in addition to publishing, another predatory market that I know of is publicity. So actually, my phone recently has been ringing off the hook because some publicity firm, quote unquote, is asking me to pay them whatever amount of money to publicize my works. So you can hire a publicist, but you can't like have people approach you with a publicity packet, which is a huge amount of money upfront without any guarantees. So basically, I think if you're in the writing and publishing business, you have to expect to be paid, not to pay money. And if you're expected to pay, and you're paying more than you're earning, then this is not legitimate. So that's kind of my cautionary word.
Angela, anything you'd add?
I agree with those things, and also the wording of the contract, because a lot of publishers will just kind of grab all rights, whether they're going to use them or not. I just had a friend say, do you think after a year of not hearing from a publisher, it's okay to, does that mean my work is not with them anymore? And unfortunately, no. If you've signed the contract, they can just keep it tied up forever unless there's a clause in there that says, if we don't publish it by this time, it reverts back to you. And also, when do your rights revert back to you? And so some of those more predatory contracts are something that really gets me, because especially as new writers, we get so excited to be published. Another friend signed a contract where she actually doesn't get anything for her work because it's the privilege of being published. And I was like, it is a privilege to be published, but we should also get paid for our work. So that's my big thing, is just checking all those little clauses. And if the publisher doesn't publish your work, what happens to it? You know?
I'm gonna quickly add on that. You talked about reversion clauses, and major publishers give reversion clauses, some of them that you can never use. You might be paid for your work. HarperCollins will pay you for your work to publish your novel. But if you look at their reversion of rights clause, you have to understand going in that you are never going to be able to leave that contract unless the publisher's feeling in a really generous mood, which they seldom are.
I was going to say, does that happen?
But at least there you've gotten paid, and your book is going to be in Barnes and Noble. If you're doing that with a short story collection for a short story and can never get it back, yeah, that's even worse. DH, is there anything you'd want to add in on the?
So I want to
opening?
stress what Angela was talking about contracts. When you're writing a short story and it's accepted and you get that contract, you do not automatically sign the last page and send it back. For example, I had a story, one of my first paid stories. I got the contract and I read the contract, and it said all my characters would henceforth always be owned by the publisher, who was going to pay me less than $50 for my 5,000 word story. And I sent an email back and saying I'm striking that clause. If that's not acceptable, I'm bowing out of your anthology. The publisher said, but this is a boilerplate standard contract. You should sign this without a qualm. And 5 minutes later, he said, everyone except 2 people who signed the contract just backed out of my project. So 2 people signed the contract, signing away their characters to this small press publisher doing an anthology. And then he said, but I'm tearing up their contracts. We're going to start over. I'm taking out that clause. Thank you all for bringing this to my attention. We'll never do it again.
Well, and good for that publisher for doing that. And that's something you bring up a good point. We can always say, I don't like that. I don't like that in this contract. We have the rights. It's our work that we're selling. And we should never feel too afraid of the publisher to say this, to say, I don't feel comfortable with this.
And I also had my first book's publisher wanted to renew their contract for an extended period. And in the second version of the contract, if I blindly signed it, I would have signed away my movie rights for eternity and my audio rights. And I said, what the heck do you need my movie rights and my audio rights when you didn't have them in the first place, and certainly didn't need them in the first place? You know, we can always negotiate something, but I'm not giving you my rights up for what royalties you're sending me. No.
Actually, so in defense of the small publishers, I wanted to say that it's not always intentional. So there are some predatory publishers out there. There are also some small presses which just get their contracts off some website, and because they don't have a lawyer to write up this contract, and they're not really malicious, they don't intend this. And I think some of the stories you brought up, DH, they're kind of in that. So if when the publisher realized that he took back this clause, so you can't always assume they're doing it on purpose to.
And they took it out because
Yeah.
I wasn't going to sign that contract, and they said I was their best-selling book.
Great.
So they didn't want to didn't lose me.
Yeah.
So I thought that was kind of nice too.
Yeah. So so before I had a traditional publisher and an agent, I used to write to Writers Beware. It's science fiction and fantasy writers of America. Writers Beware blog. So Victoria Strauss, she's really great. She always responds and she always reads the contract and gives you advice. And she is a great resource of like what is predatory and what is not. So it became kind of my gold standard. And then I got an agent to represent me who could read my contracts for me. I always did that, and I always got great advice from her. So I think you shouldn't assume that the publisher is a bad person, but you should always check on all these things.
In my experience, the worst part is not when they get the contract boilerplate off a website, because those are actually usually not too bad. The worst is when they have a lawyer write up the contract from scratch, and clearly that lawyer has never dealt with fiction rights in any capacity. And so there's a 17-page contract that is written in a completely different language from anything that like Joshua usually sees, or anything that a person that deals with a lot of short fiction contracts are accustomed to, and doesn't cover like any of the important parts, but wants like all the rights they can possibly get, because they don't realize that the relationship is supposed to be a little bit more copacetic, especially on the short fiction level when there's not a lot of money involved. The good news is, as Anna pointed out, almost always when I've gotten ridiculous contracts or ridiculous clauses like that, as long as I've contacted the publisher and I've politely explained why that's wrong and what I would like changed, I think that it's only been once or twice that I've ever had to walk away because they wouldn't change the contract in a perfectly reasonable way that I asked them to. So usually the publisher will work with you.
Yeah. And I mean, I've done this also with small presses and with big publishers. So if I don't like something in the contract or I have a question, I always ask and they always get back to me and usually resolve it in a kind of mutually agreeable way. So yeah. Right.
And think about it this way. If someone's willing to send you a contract to buy your short story or your novel, someone else is most likely going to be willing to do the same thing with proper clauses and not stealing your rights.
Yeah.
You know, once someone's expressed that kind of interest, either it's fraud or there's an editor out there who thought what you did was something that was going to work for them. So, some other agency will feel the same way.
There is, one point that I kind of want to clarify, because this is a really good kind of starter kit. And one of the things that I often tell my clients is you can't fault somebody for trying. A big publisher, any big publisher you can meet with, if you don't have an agent, they will try and get every right from you. Performance rights and audio rights and merchandising rights and any other right under the sun that you can think of. It's a business. If you think you can try and get somebody to sign something that isn't advantageous to them, it's a business. The question is, as I think has come up, what happens when you ask them to change it? What happens when you point out that, no, you don't get my movie rights because I'm selling you a short story? What happens when you ask? And I deal with this not just, like new and with new authors, with indie authors. I deal with this with established authors. People will try and get what they can. And it is your job to push back, not to expect that everybody in the business world is going to volunteer to be, the soul of politeness to you. Now I want to just put this out there. Somebody in the Q&A asked about something called an open call Facebook group that they couldn't find quickly. Does anyone have any further information?
Yeah, so
Alex?
I'm one of the moderators of that group. I'm going to put the full name of the group into the chat, and it's something that you can just type into Facebook and find it.
Okay.
I'll type it up.
Open call is very helpful. As is Rowland.com. He posts a genre for horror, sci-fi, and fantasy, and he has it staked out by how much they pay, if they're token, and if he finds that something's not legit, he drops it off the list.
So I put the name of the group into the chat. When you apply to the group, it asks you two really simple questions, and it's mostly just to identify spammers who are trying to get into the group to sell us Bitcoin. So you will not have any trouble. It asks you what your favorite genre market is, and it asks you to confirm that you will not spam the group.
You can also check out submissiongrinder.com. Those are three really good places to find legitimate open calls.
Okay. Have any of you actually stumbled into a bad situation and had it be a learning lesson?
I think probably everybody has. So I'll quickly tell my experience without naming names and pointing fingers. When I was first beginning, I got offered a contract from a small publisher. And of course, I was so super excited because, I was validated, somebody wanted my work. and I signed the contract. And for a year, it went pretty good. I got a few royalties. It was kind of a sporadic, like, oh, look, there's a surprise check in the mail. Yay. And I didn't really understand what the schedule was. It wasn't clear. What are these royalties for? What was the percentage? And I was terrible at looking at my contract. I just signed because, you know, yay, I was validated. And then they closed, or they decided to give up the ghost, which many small publishers do because it's a lot of work for not a lot of reward when you're small. And so then I found out, I think it was 2 years later, that they were still selling my book at fairs and stuff. That was kind of a big deal. I mean, when I confronted them, it was pretty peaceful, you know, and it was kind of like this, oh gosh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I forgot we don't have a publishing business anymore. So we probably shouldn't sell this book and take the money for it because it's not ours, you know, and it was all kind of peacefully resolved, except I don't know what the sales were, you know, I didn't get any of that. And so that's kind of where I've been since then, very cautious. Like, we don't need to be validated. We validate ourselves with the quality and of work that we put out. We don't need a publisher to validate us. So we do need to not just jump at the first date.
For me, there haven't been any real horror stories, but and you'll probably hear that from virtually every one of us, is that early on, I was so excited, just like Angela, I was so excited just to get published, that I was selling, quote unquote, my short stories left and right for the first year or so to all of these token markets, and I think once even to a non-paying market. Which is a huge mistake, because there is no market that is a token market or anything that's below semi-pro at the very least that will do anything for you and your career to be published in speculative genre. There may be a couple of markets that pay only a penny per word that are worth being published in, but realistically speaking, if they're not paying pro rates, most of the time you can just disregard them.
I know of one author who sold her trilogy to a small press, and she wrote all the books, and it was selling really well, but she wasn't aware of that because she never saw a royalty. And when the company decided it was time to close, because they were charging everything against her royalties, every time they went to a con to promote their publishing house and quote unquote her book, they charged their hotel room against her, all their meals against her royalties, everything. And she didn't see a penny. And she was handed her rights back by the publisher. Another publisher saw, you know, it was selling really well, took it up, and then in the first 30 days, she gets a royalty check. And she was like so puzzled. It's because it wasn't a good contract for any of her books. And she always knew that when she went to cons, she sold out of every book she had. And
Yeah.
that's a warning sign that if you're not getting any royalties and you don't have any trouble selling your books at cons, that's not a good publisher for you.
Yeah.
And you didn't read the contract to understand. And learning how to read a contract isn't that tough, because there are panels and workshops at cons that will provide you that information. Or you can go to a seminar like the Superstars Writing Seminar that Eric Flint and Kevin J. Anderson and Dave Wolverton do, and Brandon Sanderson was a founder of, and there'll be a session on how to read a contract. So you can learn the business and not be frightened that you need to be a lawyer to understand your 2 or 3 page contract.
I think, yeah, one important lesson I learned was not to undersell yourself. So, like many new authors, I was really thrilled when I was offered my first publishing contract. So it was for a token, like they paid me like $100 advance with some like reasonable royalties, which I never got. And eventually this publisher just went out of business. And the rights were reverted. So I think I regret. So at that time, I had an offer from an agent to be represented, but I thought I already have a publisher, so why do I need an agent? So I just went with that. And this is one of the, I feel like, big mistakes that I made in my life. So, and I went through this very bumpy road. So another time I got approached by an agent, and he offered to represent me, and I actually got some money of the contract he got for me. Later on, I learned, bless you, that he's a predatory agent. So he eventually tried to publish my work under his name, and that was kind of bizarre. So I was able to catch that. But so there are like a lot of mistakes you make just because you, so as a new author, you just want to get published, and you get so elated when somebody wants to publish your work. So by the time I got the traditional publishing, I actually did it without an agent, and it was at the time that I utterly gave up on any publications. And I just, in retrospect, I feel like I should have just waited for a good deal without going through all this stuff. But I know how hard it is when you're just starting and somebody offers to publish your work on any terms. So.
Which we should actually bring up to the 38 people watching and whoever's watching this video. Don't be scared, be educated. Because listening to your stories right now, I'm like, oh, I don't want to do this anymore. It's really scary and dangerous. It's not. You just have to be educated. Education is key.
Yeah.
Which is why you're here.
And Anna, let me, we have a question in the queue from Tammy, and she's asking, when do you need to get an agent? From your experiences, how would you answer her?
So yeah, that's kind of a tricky thing. So you absolutely need an agent, I think, when you have a publisher, because this is when you want somebody to negotiate on your behalf and get you the best deal possible. So ideally, you want to get an agent as soon as you wrote something that you think will be published, but this is like kind of a tricky road. So in my own experience, I found it's harder to get an agent than to get a publisher. So both time I got publishers, I did it before I got agents, and then I got agents to represent those deals. And I'm really happy. And now I have an agent who represents me. I'm really happy having an agent who will negotiate on my behalf anytime I have anything publishable. But it's not really a straightforward road. So the traditional way we're all taught is like, we write a good novel, we send it to agents, agents like it, they send it to publishers, and then publishers publish it, and agents get you the best deal. The truth is, agents are also like, I mean, Joshua will speak to it more than I could, but agents are extremely busy people who are under the same constraints as publishers, except they probably see a lot more work coming their way, and they can only represent whatever they love the best. So getting an agent is not that easy. So you don't close the doors just because you couldn't get an agent, but you have to absolutely get an agent by the time you found the publisher, which will be like the best publisher for you. So yeah, so in my case, I think I went backwards. Both times I found traditional publishers, and it's kind of one of the ways to go, which I think is reasonable.
As an indie author, I don't have an agent. I'm not interested in sharing what I'm self-publishing. I don't think what I'm writing, if it's of interest to a traditional publisher, that would be a different piece. But I published 21 books since 2012. My editor says I've been publishing my backlist of 30 years, which is probably true. But short stories, you don't need your agent or an agent to rep something that you may get paid up to $400 for, right? Because their percentage isn't big enough to make that worthwhile.
Yeah.
But as Anna said, if you've got a traditional book publisher and they've sent you a contract, it's a lot easier for an agent to say, "Oh, I'll make money on that. I'll take that," But finding the right list, you can check the SIFWA website for legitimate agents, and you can check Writers Beware for the agents that are not legitimate.
Yeah.
I think
It's a great point. Like the
Alex?
sorry, go ahead.
So yeah,
Alex, go ahead.
in the end, I think it comes down to what career path you want to follow. If you want to self-publish, then certainly it is a path that has become open to more and more people because of the technology advances. But many of us still want to be published with, big professional publishers for various reasons. And if that's your goal, you should absolutely be seeking representation first. And I think the good time to start doing that is when you've not only finished your novel but completely polished it up. Don't do it too soon. Don't start shopping for an agent when you have a few chapters written. You should have your book ready to go, your first book at least, and that way you can, if they request to see a full, you can send them something that you are not embarrassed to show. At the same time, you can still look for publishers and look for open submissions call if you're unagented, the way that Anna did, or maybe even have a publisher approach you if you have a track record with other things. But it should not preclude you from doing an agent search and finding someone. And I think it's really, really important, not only to find an agent who is legitimate, which is kind of an obvious goal, but also somebody that gets your work and that you can work well with together. Because there's a lot of writers that I know who kind of have had bad marriages with their agents and had to go and find somebody new and essentially go through the messy divorce with them. So take the time to kind of really talk. Even if you're offered representation, take the time to talk to the potential agent, get to know them, and make sure that the two of you can work together as partners.
Anna, did you
Yeah,
have
just
some?
kind of reiterate on what DH said, that yeah, agents get a percentage of what you get. So if you want to get a good agent, your deal, kind of the contract you're being offered, has to be worth it, or you have to go for like the real money basically on your book. So otherwise, the good agents both won't sign you up, and just neither you or the agents would benefit from this. So one thing, that it's a business relationship which has to be mutually beneficial. The other thing, that a good agent is your career guide, kind of. So you have to have this great working relationship with the agent, in a way that the agent can help you to kind of, I mean, my agent tells me like what kind of things I should focus on and what things I should not focus on. And she reads my work and she says, this doesn't sell very well, you should do this. And you want the agent who kind of guides your entire career, basically. So to me, if you just wrote a good novel and you want to publish it with somebody, it's almost not worth it to look for a good agent. But if you want to be a career writer, then you absolutely need to have one. So, yeah.
And one point I want to add is, short fiction contracts can be 2 or 3 pages. Sometimes even I've seen 1 page. A good one doesn't need to be very long. A good and fair one to both the publisher. Some of the book contracts we have for major publishers are over 20,000 words long. So the businesses overlap, but they're also very different. And you don't need to be a lawyer, but it's different looking at 20,000 words than it is looking at 1,200 as well. And I think that's an important, kind of distinction also to add. And just to say, we're not getting a lot of questions, which kind of surprises me for a panel that's oriented toward new writers. I usually expect people will have a few more questions for us. Let me just let me just, what is the worst story that you have heard from somebody? Let's start on that with Angela. just kind of from your, wanderings around the world of books and writers. What's the worst horror story you've come across?
The worst horror story I have come across, the author doesn't actually know it is a horror story yet, but it was my friend with the predatory contract. And I looked at the contract and there's all of these crazy things written in there. I actually took her name off it, and I belong to Horror Writers Association, a couple others, and I posted it there. And all the information that was personal was stripped, and said, what do you guys think of this contract? It's like the worst contract I've ever seen. And it has really weird things in it, like she's only getting royalties every year, but only after the first year, because the first year royalties have to go to the expenses, which is the publisher's responsibility. That's why they're taking a bet to buy this book, because they're betting that they can make the money on this book and make a profit. And then she could never publish another book. It's a photography book of photos from that area again, or something ridiculous like that, which I'm like, what? That is the area that you live in. I hope to God she's not watching this, but I did say this to you if you are watching this. If you live in an area and that is where you're working, that's ridiculous to think that you are not going to you just have to stop or move, or so that was just the horror contract. And her response was, well, you know what, I have this in hand and I'm super excited. This is a bucket list item that I want to get published, and I'm only doing one. Well, she's on her third book now with the same company. So it's, that's kind of been like I still think about it, my heart starts beating, and I'm like, oh my God, you're giving up everything, And especially if it's a bucket list item, if you only plan on writing one, make it a damn good one, get something for it.
Alex, I'd like to you.
I have an answer to that
Alex, I'd
question.
like to. Yeah, please, DH. Sorry.
Okay, so at the first science fiction con I went to was about in 2010, and Kevin J. Anderson was the guest of honor at that con, and he did the things you need to know about the business. And his horror story was he did an anthology in the Star Wars universe, and he was sent from Lucasfilm their contract, which was shared with every single person who was doing his anthology. And the contract said, all your characters are the property of Lucasfilm, not the characters from the story. All of your characters that you will ever write will be property of Lucasfilm. So Kevin called Lucasfilm and said, that's really egregious. He says, well, George demands that we put that clause in every single contract. He doesn't demand that anyone accept that clause, so just cross it out of your contract. We will not rewrite the contract. You can just cross it out, and that's fine by us. So Kevin got 2 contracts in the mail, signed instantly without looking at anything. And he made everyone else cross that piece out, because that's as egregious as it comes, that nothing you will ever write, you will own the rights to.
Yeah, as I was mentioning, they'll ask for anything, and it's what happens when you push back that's interesting. Okay. I wanted to then kick over one of the Q&A questions to Alex, because you've been both a writer and an editor of short fiction. So Den Schumann is asking, what are the major points you should make sure are in a short fiction or book contract? And if you could run through on short fiction? What are the kind of fair things to expect for both the publisher and the author?
Sure. As Joshua pointed out earlier, a good short fiction contract should not be more than a couple of pages because you simply don't need that many things from the author. To start, you want first rights. The publisher will demand first rights unless it's a reprint, which means that the story can't have appeared anywhere else previously, and they have the right to publish it first. And then they have the right to be publishing it exclusively for a certain period of time. An acceptable period of time is usually up to a year. There are a few good publishers that will ask for a year and a half or even two, but anything beyond that is completely unreasonable for a short story. You want to make sure that you're only giving up the rights in the English language, if at all possible. You want to make sure that you're only giving up the rights in the formats in which they're going to publish the story. So if they want audio rights as part of the deal, and they constantly publish the story in audio, as many magazines do, that's fine. But if you know that they don't plan on exercising those rights, then they shouldn't be asking for them. You want to make sure that there's a clause that says, hey, if this story is not published within X amount of time after the contract has been signed, then the rights automatically revert to you. You don't need any kind of additional confirmation. You don't need to send anything in the mail. It just happens. So they have a certain amount of time, and if it's not published by then, if the editor, God forbid, passes away or the market closes, there is a point in which you get the rights back legally and without having to chase down the new rights holders. There are a lot of other small things, but really, I think those are probably, and by all means, guys, please try to correct me if I'm missing something really major. But again, it should be really simple. You have what you're getting paid. That amount should be upfront, preferably either prior to publication or within 30 days of publication, you should be paid in full. If there are royalties that should be outlined in the contract, there aren't always royalties in short fiction contracts. A lot of the times you get a one-time payment, and that's usually fine as long as it's a fair amount. And you should keep all extra rights. You're never giving up movie rights, merchandising rights. None of that stuff should ever come into play for a short story unless you're writing in somebody else's universe. So again, as an example DH gave, if you're writing a Star Wars story, then yes, they will own the characters and anything you do that's in that particular story. That is to be expected. But you should also get paid for that properly. But in a normal short fiction transaction, most of my contracts are under 2 pages, and that's, I think that should be expected. There's lots of samples. SIFO has a sample contract, though I would argue that one is actually a little too friendly to the authors compared to the publishers, but just a little bit. It just only overbends the stick a little, and after all, they are an organization that represents the authors and not the publishers. But it's a good place to start.
Mhm. Yeah, I wanted to add that, yeah, basically contracts are not rocket science. I have no legal education. And by the time I saw my first contract, English was very much my second language, but you could read through it and you can just see. So if there is some language you don't understand, you can either Google it or ask. But usually there are terms, you can just look through these terms and you can see, is it okay with you or does it pose any questions? And if it poses any questions, you can ask the publisher. Usually the publishers, unless they're predatory, put it there like for like some kind of complex reasons that they don't usually hold on to. So if you are not okay with some contracts, you could change everything usually, and everything is negotiable except sometimes the money. So yeah, just don't be afraid of contracts and always ask and always assume that the publisher is willing to negotiate with you. So I think, yeah, I've found, so I negotiate contracts on my own and through agents. And like with agents, sometimes I was the kind of hard ass who came up with some questions which the agent didn't think were reasonable, but the agents brought them to the publishers and they were resolved. So yeah, I think, and also because I'm running a small press, I also see the other side of it. Usually the publishers put these things in because they use some boilerplate contracts and they don't mean anything bad. And if the authors are not okay with something, they're always willing to negotiate. So yeah, I think, I assume that it's a friendly business by default, but yeah.
I think most publishers, especially small publishers, get into it for the love of it, and because they're also writers. So I agree with you, Anna, that certainly not getting rich, even if you're predatory. I don't know where the riches would come from. I mean, I could probably be predatory and I would still be poor somehow.
Yeah.
And
So I would just like to add one thing.
Yeah.
Don't fear rejection letters. They're not assaults on what you wrote and your ability. They're simply a fact of life that there's only so many stories that can be accepted by Clark's World or Analog or any other magazine or any anthology. Only so many are going to make the cut. When you make the cut, terrific. But don't take that story and say, oh, it got one rejection, I shouldn't send it to anybody else. You don't have to worry about all these contracts and say, oh, I don't want to send out anything now because it sounds too scary.
Yeah.
Life is scary, but it's also a lot of fun and it's a roller coaster.
Except 2020.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, when you submit something for publication, you're looking for this one unique person who loves what you wrote, or like who believes that not only it can sell, but they have to love it too. And this goes for publishers and agents as well. And it's incredibly hard to find those people. So don't assume that it reflects on your work. It just means that you haven't found your fit. If you have written a good piece, the fit is somewhere out there. So just, yeah, I agree that don't be baffled by rejections.
And one other question we have is, what points get the most pushback, how to handle that pushback. One of the interesting things is you never know what people are going to be very firm on in life. The biggest advice I would give is always ask twice. I can speak from experience with most publishing companies that there are things they never say yes to if you only ask once, and things that they will then say yes to if you ask twice. And sometimes if you ask a third time with a really good explanation, but just, and to give you one example of that from me, when I started my agency and was spending hours on the phone and had a $300 long distance bill for the first month, because back then we had long distance charges, I still insist on being able to charge an author if I have a really expensive phone call with you, even though the only way that will happen is if the only way I can call you is an international mobile number that has a surcharge and we spend 20 minutes on the line and I can't Skype you or I can't Zoom you or something. If you want to say the only way I can ever call you is on an international mobile number and run me up a big phone bill for that, then darn it, I'm gonna charge you for it. And that doesn't actually make any rational sense, because the last time I've charged any client for a phone bill, like a phone call, is years ago, but I still remember that $300 long distance bill from November 1994.
Well, Joshua, you sound like you want to make money at the work that you do. So odd. I mean, that's not fair.
And we are just about, well, we are kind of out of time because it is 9:20. So I would like to thank all of the panelists. We had a lot of questions come into the end and we didn't get to all of them. Maybe some of us will be in the Discord chat after. But thank you everyone on the panel and the audience, and enjoy your evening and the remaining 2 days of Balticon.
Well,
Thank you all.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you for moderating, Joshua. Thank you, everyone. And we'll see some of us will see you at Discord.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Thanks.
Great.